We are discussing I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem tonight by Maryse Condé. And it's certainly quite an exciting book. I just want to give people a chance to join us before we officially dive in. So bear with me. We had quite a response to this book.
Yeah, I had a hard time joining as well. The password was incorrect, so it took me a little bit to get back in.
Did you need a password to get in?
I had to, I went back into the Zoom link and then it let me in. But when I was trying to do it originally, it wouldn't let me. And so then maybe it's a Zoom thing. Then I had to join with the ID. And when I tried the password, it was incorrect. So I don't know. I had some difficulty too. So I'm not sure if others are as well.
Thank you for that feedback, Lisette. What finally worked though? How did you finally?
I was able to go on the link because usually, you know, when you put your link, it was able to go through. I don't know if that was just me or
the original link or the second one that I posted.
You know what? I think it was the second one.
The comment. Okay. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go back in and read.
Did you have that problem too, Debbie, or was yours different?
I didn't see the link at all, so I had nowhere to click to go, but once the link was there, I was able to click it and get in right away.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. I hope the message goes out to everybody. Just looking to see if there's activity on our page and if maybe I can message everyone who RSVP'd. Oh, Linda, Zoom link doesn't seem to be working. Join on the link. Yeah. Those dings are your your comments and messages coming in. I'm glad Linda's going to be joining us.
Hi, I'm going to say hello.
Hey.
Let you see my face, and then I'm going to turn it off because I'm just listening.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here, Linda. Glad you could get in.
Yeah, I was struggling, but I stuck with it. So
Not
yes.
the only one. We were having some technical difficulties, so it's not you. It's not you. It's us. It's Zoom or something. I'm not sure.
All right. I hope you don't mind me just listening in.
Not at all. Not at all. So this book was a little bit more challenging this month because it's only available in hard copy, and I saw some people asking about that. If you're like me, I often turn to an audiobook if I'm, short on time for actual, sitting down to read. But this forced me to do so. Although it was my second round reading I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, and I was excited to read it a second time. So I'd love to hear, we have some deep questions to dive into the book with, but I'd love to hear your first impressions. So just if we could go around and get an idea of what everyone's general response was to our choice this month.
I really liked it. I have some historical questions for it, which no one can really answer, but of course I'm the one who's going to bring them up. So I'm sure they'll come up during discussion, but it was like the one thing I was reading the book and really enjoying it, but I was also like questioning it, like, I don't know about this the whole way through.
And probably because you're so well versed in the history that you can't help Yeah.
I know, it's true.
Know what you know what you know, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Lisette?
I really liked it as well. It made me really sad, because I didn't question the history as much, just kind of looking at just the whole history of colonization and how some of that stuff is still happening and just the treatment of women in general. So, but I really enjoyed it. I was glad to have read it and to finally be here. I always say I'm gonna go and then I never make it. So I'm excited to be
Yes,
here.
I'm glad. I'm so glad you could join us. That's wonderful. Like I said, this was my second round reading it, and it was an interesting experience the second time around, I guess, because I knew what to expect. So you read it with a different set of, a different lens, right? Because you can notice things that maybe escaped you the first time. But I found it to be engaging and just quite a journey, an emotional journey that I think has some great lessons embedded in it. So we're going to talk more about that, but certainly I agree with you, Lisette, not a very, I guess, positive view of history at all. But a very real one, I think, even if it's not historically accurate, the emotional content of it, I think, is very real. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It's definitely a thumbs up, like highly recommend on my end. What struck you, if anything, as unexpected or unusual about the book, about the story or the characters, the setting, anything at all surprising about it?
I think that all the things that surprise me are again tied into history. So I'm happy to go into them, but if someone else wants to talk first.
Well, why don't you give us at least one example at this point? Why not?
Sure. So I guess the biggest surprise was that Tituba was a witch, though that wasn't the word that she would use for herself. I think all of the research that I've seen about the Salem witch trials indicates that the magic that she supposedly did was actually English magic that she would have learned from the white people in New England and possibly before then, but that it wasn't African magic or native Barbados magic. And so I was actually a little bit disappointed that she went that route, that they actually gave her magic. But it was surprising, but it ultimately disappointed me.
Okay. And that's something that we know about Tituba as reported by whom?
Oh gosh.
What you mentioned about her
Yeah.
learning it from the English.
I mean, it's been so long, I couldn't tell you a specific source at this point. But like they actually skipped it in this book. They didn't talk about it at all. But the story goes that the girls who used to gather in the kitchen with her, one of the things they did was, I think it was like you crack an egg into water and you watch the shape and it forms like the face of the man that you're meant to marry. And that's supposedly the magic that Tituba did that started the whole thing. And that's actually something that's like English folk magic. And I wish I could remember the source. There's a few at this point that I've read that have said that, but it's not African magic. It's not native. It's English.
And it's an interesting distinction you make, I think, because it leads to her ultimate persecution. So if she's being persecuted for something that is of her own heritage, that's an entirely different story than being persecuted for something you learned from your aggressor, right?
Yeah.
It's a different story to tell.
Yeah, and it's kind of they briefly make mention of Mary Sibley in this book and her urine cake. I don't know if you guys caught that, but that's like an actual thing from Salem, that she actually did make a urine cake. And it's I mean, it's all those little like folk magic things that everyone in the community kind of knew that Tituba was just doing. She just happened to be doing it with the wrong people at the wrong time. Is everything that I've read. I don't know. And making her a witch, giving her magic, it changed. I mean, just like you said, it changes the story, and I'm not sure I like how it changes it.
Mm. Okay. Great point. Lisette, anything surprising for you? Yeah.
Something that surprised me, and I guess that's where it's like not knowing my history, but when she meets the Jewish merchant, that surprised me. That I didn't expect that. It was a cool contrast to her suffering, and just just the fear of the unknown for many folks during that time. So that was a surprising thing for me when I saw that story emerge.
Can I interject something totally
Yes,
random?
I wanted to ask you, Debbie. Go ahead.
No, first of all, let me just say that I actually don't know the history of who bought Tituba after. I have no idea if it was a Jewish merchant or not, if he really existed. But here's a fun fact I learned this past week. And I don't know if it's true, because I've heard a different origin for the witch's hat, but the conical, stereotypical witch's hat. I read something that said that in medieval times, and I forget exactly which European country it was, but it kind of happened in all of them at some point. To identify the Jews as Jews, they were forced to wear a certain kind of hat, and that became known as the Jew hat. And a way to continue to other different peoples, anyone who is supposedly a witch was forced to wear a Jew hat. I just thought that was interesting. So it kind of like weirdly ties into this book, but it's also really random. And I don't know for sure if that's true, but because I've heard stories about like the power of the triangle, and that's why it's conical, but who knows?
Interesting. I mentioned it. My son's reading The Crucible in his, class at school. And so I've been telling him a lot about this book, even, and I just keep reminding him this is a fictionalization. It's not, but he turned to me and said, there were Jews in Salem. I said, no. This was a merchant, if I'm understanding correctly, this was a merchant that came to the area, purchased her, but he had to live elsewhere, right? They were not part of the Salem village or the town of Salem, if I'm not mistaken.
That was at a different place, right? When she
Right.
left for Salem, she was in a
Right.
different little town.
She was
I thought
jailed elsewhere.
She was jailed, and then he bought her when she was released from jail. Yeah, I thought they were someplace else, not in Salem.
Yeah, it was weird because it sounded that way, but then it almost sounded like they were in Salem proper. I don't know, maybe they were in Boston. It sounded like they were close enough to Salem, though.
Well, like they knew who she was. Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah.
Then she mentions in the book that he leaves for Rhode Island because that seemed to be a more friendly place for Jewish families to go to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that opened up for me. I just thought, I'm so curious about that. What were the relationships like for anyone who wasn't a Puritan, wasn't not just not Christian, but not, because I know the Puritans and the Quakers had beef, right? There was criticism of anyone who was not following their plan, their moral code, if you will, or religious code. So that got me curious. And I also was surprised by that, Lisette, very much so. I loved and was surprised by the voice of Tituba sounding like she's talking to us right now, in this a postmodern awareness of the oppressive forces at work. So she had our lens in, as if she was telling us now, her spirit coming through the book now, giving us a retrospective look at her life and experiences. And I remember just even the first time around thinking, Tituba's looking back at history in this book. What did you think about that?
I mean, I think getting to the end of the book, it makes sense because it's kind of like she becomes the spirit, like her mother, or I'm sorry, I can't remember the other woman's name who raised her.
Yaya and Abena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like she lives on, like they lived on for her. She's living on for us to help us learn a lesson
Mm,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, I at first I didn't get that she was looking back until the end.
Mm,
She was I thought she was chronicling, or maybe I missed it, or so I think I missed that part. I thought she was in it
Yeah.
until the very end, when she was looking back.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's spelled out that way. I don't think it's introduced that way, but just her keen sense of, I'm being treated this way because I'm female, or I'm being treated this way because I'm African, because I've been enslaved. Her awareness of her, of the injustice of her place in society, I think is what struck me as a modern voice, because I would expect her in her time to have an internalized racism and oppression at work, but her voice sounded like someone, you know what I mean, who had healed from that and who knew to be someone of deserving of more freedom and rights and autonomy than she enjoyed in her lifetime. So it's that voice that sounded to me distinctly like, the way people read things now and look back and say, oh, well, that's misogynistic, but in its time, no one would have pointed that out. It was just the way things are.
Right.
And Condé, I think does that on purpose. But I didn't expect it. I don't know what I expect the first time around. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I also think about it being translated from French and what it has lost potentially in translation. That always irks me, when I can't get to the original. So that leaves me wondering too, but alas.
I also just thought that was interesting that it was originally written in French, which means that even though it's an American story, it wasn't for Americans.
Mm. Mm.
Or the majority of Americans, I should say.
Mm. Well, she's a Caribbean author, and I guess writing in the language that she's most comfortable expressing in. But the afterword, did you read the afterword about all that? About,
I don't remember it now, but I know I did.
Yeah, it talks a lot about, literature and language, Creole versus, continental French and all of that. It was an interesting look into just how things are categorized in the literary world. I'm looking for the questions that I posted, and they're not showing up for me for some reason. Oh, no, found them. Okay. So let me dive into this first one. A doozy, I think. There's multiple questions here, but Tituba is discriminated against for many reasons, right? So there's an intersectionality of her identities as a woman, as a person of color, as an enslaved person, as a healer, I'm calling her, maybe not witch, but healer, and a non-Christian in view of the Puritans. And these things inspire bigotry from many angles. Let's talk a little bit about these overlapping identities as they are explored in the text. What was your reaction to much of her discrimination at any point? You can jump into any point of the story. Maybe you identified with it. Maybe you were surprised by it.
I mean, it was kind of what I expected. I think there were times though when she was respected as a healer, and it was only, when things were going wrong. This is the story, right? That for everyone, but as soon as things went wrong, it was a problem. But before then, everyone wanted her help and thought of her as like almost revered her as a wise woman, except obviously they wouldn't because of all the other identities she had. And so I found that interesting because it made her fall that much worse.
Because she knew what it was then to be appreciated or respected for her talents. Yeah.
So the question, if I get it correctly, was to what was my our reaction to like the discrimination that she experienced in general, whether it was for her craft or for her being a woman.
Mhm.
I think what really struck me, and she kind of made a lot of comments around that, how she kept searching for love. You know,
Mm.
they kind of made it in a general sweep, like, oh, you're too much into love, because she was even sometimes kind to the people that oppressed her, even
Mm.
though she did do some things, right, where she kind of hexed that the other woman. But also her still wanting to find love in men and getting that voice of Hester, was it? Men are always have it in a much more kind way. So
Mm.
even though kind of that paradox of like, I know that as a woman I get mistreated and men have it better, but still looking for that.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty common then and now too, the dependence on the patriarch.
Mhm. It's interesting you point that out. I was thinking about another thing that's mentioned in the book repeatedly is her relationship with John Indian helps to highlight how much harder she has it as a woman, even though John Indian was also in the position of being enslaved. And I loved the way the author had John Indian playing the role, playing the dutiful servant, just give them what they want, just act the part and get them to leave you alone. Say the prayers, say yes, master, whatever, just play the part. In contrast to her sort of willful insistence on, no, this isn't me. And I think both approaches are an attempt to survive, right? Of survival. But John Indian chooses to hide himself and pretend, and she's not willing to do that so easily. And I found that really interesting as a source of friction between them, and as a contrast just in different ways that people respond to oppression. Like the path of least resistance may seem like the best course of action, but what are you really sacrificing if you're willing to hide who you are? And those themes are repeated so much probably in every story with Salem witch trials, right? Yeah, so that struck me. And then also the discrimination of Tituba being paralleled by the discrimination of the Jewish family, of Benjamin's family. And just the way that they were able to understand each other as both feeling like outsiders. And she even comments, Condé, I remember that striking me, where she comments about Tituba reflecting, how is this that, even though this family is in white skin, they're not okay either. They oppress each other. These white demons who, are willing to oppress others. They even do it from her perspective, they do it to themselves, right? Because it's not a matter of skin color with Benjamin, but she feels, she can sense that very much he's in a similar place to her in that society, and can't make sense of that.
She made me feel very seen during this part.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and I think, sorry, I read in the afterword that Maryse Condé spent a lot of time with a friend of hers while she was writing the book, who happened to be Jewish, and it was in discussions with her friend that she felt inspired to create this storyline, whether or not it actually happened, and it probably didn't. But the inspiration, right, came from that realization in the author too, that there's a parallel of oppression and otherness, as you were saying, Zebby, And I think she incorporated it really beautifully. And I love that they became lovers. I think that was a brilliant choice too, because it was like they were comforting each other in their state of suffering. I just felt like that was really effective. What were your thoughts on her relationship with the boy? I can't remember his name now, but the one who at first called her mom.
Oh, I can't pronounce it. I'm gonna call him Ephianum or something like that.
Yes, or Iphigene, or
Yeah.
yes.
And yeah, and then he becomes her lover,
Yeah.
her son, her lover, her what is she like three different things. I mean, that was interesting. In some ways, it can go back to her need of having a man help her and take over.
Mm,
Because he says, you need a man in the house. And even though this was like, it sounded like he was a child. I mean, or at
yeah.
least that still gave her kind of solace or felt like she has someone there taking care of her. And she would even kind of let him take over, right? With the rebellion and all that. Like you go ahead, like gave him a lot of what is that called? Like maybe statue, like just putting him up on a pedestal when he
Yeah.
did.
But I also felt like she was just manipulating him, not manipulating him, but sort of cashing in on his adoration of her. Like, okay, I need you to do this for me. I need, able to work through him in a way that she couldn't do herself because she was a woman and I think she's pregnant at the time. But yeah, his leading of the rebellion is, I think, an act of love towards her. And I feel like she's just, I don't know, she has the upper hand. She's the older person in the relationship. She dominates the relationship, maybe for the first time. Because in contrast to John Indian, she gives up her freedom for John Indian.
Yeah.
Right? Like she's living independently in her shack and she's got, nobody to answer to but herself. And she forfeits all of that to go be by her man's side. And she gives up a lot. It seems like at the end of the book, she's switched places, right? And she's calling the shots in her relationship with this boy.
Well, I'm glad you brought up John Indian because that's sort of what I was thinking. Like he's the opposite. John Indian was the one who seemed to have all this knowledge,
Mm.
and she went to him. And this time she's the one with the knowledge, and the boy went to her. And I think Tituba also was just the way she was characterized in this book. She's just a very passionate person. Like she just is one of those people that really needs, I feel like there's a better way of saying it than just needs sex, but right.
Yeah.
Like I just think that's one of those things. Like she needs it for comfort. She needs it for connection. She needs it to feel like a woman. And so here's this boy who adores her, and maybe she's using him a little bit for that, but she didn't think about it till he brought it up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So why not take advantage, because it's something that she clearly yearns for.
Mm. And she seems to have a capacity to love in many forms. Like she's not looking for one particular type of man or what, she's like, I'll find a way to love you. I'll find something lovable in you. Right. Right. Regardless. Anything else about discrimination towards her?
This book made me think about, and I'm not sure how to say this distinctly, but you guys are probably used to me talking a lot anyway, so what does it matter? So I came away from this book thinking about slaves and sex, because I mean, like the fact that her mother was raped, and I just there's this interesting thing where enslaved people are seen as chattel on the one hand and not even human, but yet on the other hand, like
Mm,
it's against the law to have sex with your animals, but it's okay to have
Mm.
sex with your slaves. Like it's this weird, I don't know. This book really made me think about that and question it on a level that I had never really thought about before. I mean, obviously it's something, like Thomas Jefferson's always in the news with, with Sally Hemings, where they, was she his mistress or was it a power dynamic? And really she was just being raped repeatedly, and, obviously we'll never know the answer, but we kind of have turned around on what we think the answer is now in our society. And so it's something that I guess maybe like my brain has just been thinking about peripherally, but I don't know, this book really brought it home. The way she was treated. And there was that one scene, oh God, I mean, Reverend Paris was, I'll be nice and call him a dick, no matter how you look at history. But the scene where he and the others raped her with a stick, God, I mean, to think that that's even a thing that could have happened, I had to put the book down. I don't even want to talk about it now, but it's part of this whole thing, right? Like like this person isn't even a person. They're not even human. They're like an animal. And yet, unlike your animals, you can have sexual intercourse with them. And I don't understand the thought, like with the hypocrisy of it. But I guess slavery is hypocrisy in and of itself, and that's the answer. I don't know.
yeah. Yeah. And the particular scene you're talking about, I'm with you. It was, I couldn't believe what I was reading. Even the second time around, I was like, oh, I must have blocked this out. I don't remember, I felt like I didn't remember that scene. And it is such a vile, I mean, it's more than just an act of violence. It's like violence at the most horrific level, I feel, right? And from the very man who's supposed to be a man of God, who's supposed to be a religious leader. Like I don't even understand how someone who considers themselves to be a representation of goodness and decency, how that can exist in the same being. You know what I mean? As someone who would commit such a horrific act of violence against another, a body of any sort, human or otherwise, just another living thing. But I sort of, I cringe at the thought of killing a bug. Like anything that's alive. So yeah, I think the classification of enslaved people as not human was really just a matter of convenience and legal techniques to keep them from owning property, owning their own, having their own rights, having anything applied to them that applied to free citizens. I don't think it means that they weren't like really seen as human, though. You know what I mean? I think it's a legal distinction, certainly, for the convenience of that legal umbrella that them enslaved or keeps them oppressed from having any ability to live free, productive lives.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I'm not saying that I actually think that those people who enslaved others didn't realize that they were actually human. But the fact that they would say one thing,
I
don't know, it just really got to me after this book, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, certainly.
I think for me, what kept popping up is like how much we've moved forward and we've been progressive, and yet how much we're still the same in terms of just thinking of reproductive rights for women, or kind of still struggling with some of these issues. I mean, I don't always listen to everything, but just on Instagram, hearing Kanye West being very anti-Semitic. I mean, or the stats that there's people who don't believe the Holocaust existed. I'm sorry. Like,
Mhm.
what? So it's so many things, like we've moved forward, and yet some of these things we're still kind of grappling with now.
And certainly, I agree with you, Lisette. It's something that also I think the book made me reflect on trauma in the body, which is something I've been sort of reading more about and understanding more about, and the generationally, the generation to generation, like inheritance of trauma. And so, as you mentioned, Debbie, Tituba in this book is portrayed as a child who's the product of a violent act, right? And then is born to a mother who can't seem to really love her,
Yeah.
actively care for her, right? So she has inherited trauma right from the start. And then her life is a series, like it's one loss and traumatic event after another, without any real opportunity for healing or understanding before the next blow comes. Her
Yeah.
resilience is phenomenal. And I have to imagine that the real Tituba, right, or the women that she represents, had parallel stories to this, had circumstances like these. And their, great granddaughters are alive, or great, I don't know how far it would be, but their descendants are alive and carrying some of that trauma inherited from generation to generation that has yet to be resolved, because we still, even now, with all of our scientific understanding and our human understanding, we don't know how to resolve trauma. We don't know how to get past it. We try. And so it really made me think about the generations that have had a ripple effect from these kinds of events, these kinds of exchanges between our ancestors.
Mhm.
All right, I think we're deep. That first question led us in a bunch of different directions, but let's move on to Angela Davis. She's an activist and an author herself. She explores Tituba's themes in the foreword of the novel. So in that foreword, she describes Tituba's story as a cycle of death and life, death, and rebirth, but also a story of revenge and a metaphor for the unheard voices of Black women. How does this contribute to your understanding of the text? First of all, did you read the foreword before diving into the story?
Yeah.
We did.
I wish I remembered it better. I don't even remember it being Angela Davis, which it's weird because she and I share. She went to Brandeis and go Brandeis. So
Yeah, she's iconic.
yeah, she's wonderful. I wish I remembered more. I feel like I have to look at it right now so I can talk.
Yeah.
Maybe because I just recently finished reading it, and I'm still kind of left with the sadness of it all. I mean, I kind of feel like, with what you said about the trauma, like just how much they've suffered, and yet there is a lot of resiliency, and she still had the capacity to love and care for others on top of all the things that she'd gone through. I am having a hard time just hearing, the more positive things. I definitely did get how she is able to own her sexuality and how powerful
Ooh.
that is. That I could see throughout the book, which she made no excuses for her wants or desires. I appreciated that. And even when she said, I don't know if I could be a feminist when I enjoy, having sex, she says it a different way, but having sex so much with a man. So that I could see. The other stuff, I mean, I know it's powerful, but that's harder for me to see in the midst of the challenges that she went through and how it ended, right? I mean, she was hung, and she saw all the other people behind. So it was a tragic death.
Yeah. But really she ends it, the book ends with her with rebirth. It feels like, I mean, she's talking to us post execution at the end, right? Am I?
Yeah, she does. Yeah, and she's everywhere now. She says, I'm
Yeah.
happy. Yeah, that's true.
And she's continuing her work with her boy lover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, her boy lover, pretty much.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the interesting examples of the death rebirth cycle I found in the death of her child, like the way she eliminated her pregnancy, put an end to her pregnancy, and therefore it was a death of her at the same time, like a death of her role as a mother, or her potential as a mother, because she was decisively saying, no, I'm not going to bring a child into this life, into this world the way it is. But then she is reborn as a mother every time she encounters a soul that she can mother, and
That's true. Yeah.
expresses her motherly love with so many people throughout the book. I mean, with the Paris children, even Abigail, and with Benjamin's children, with the boy lover at the end. And I
That's
found
true.
that to be really filled with a certain hope. I think she even says at one point, like, maybe you're meant, she tells him, maybe you're meant to replace the child that I didn't have. Yeah, I liked that idea that it was a rebirth of her potential for mothering.
That's true. And I think she did mention when she did become pregnant this last time, it was Mama Yaya or one of them was telling her, you can't get rid of this one. It is in your nature. Your something to that effect, like your true
Yes.
nature is coming out. But she didn't have the baby, right? Because she was hung.
Right.
But it sounds like the baby was with her in the afterlife. So yeah, I do remember that. That's true. That she did highlight that for her.
Oh, she just is a woman that, and I mean, you said it with the word resilient, right? But like, she just has so many lives in this book.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's like she's constantly, I mean, reinvented isn't really the right word, because when you reinvent yourself, there's like a choice in the matter, and she very rarely had a choice in what was happening. So maybe in that way, rebirth is the right word. But it's like her identity kept changing as she had to keep going from one thing to the next, whether it was her choice or not.
I think you bring up an important point there about choice. You made me reflect on it earlier in the sense that, let's take her relationship with Benjamin, for example, consensual, very sweet, very healing. But where else was she going to go? Like, what, like when you mentioned Sally Hemings, it made me think of that, made me think back to that moment. Like, Benjamin owns her.
Yeah.
And so even though I wouldn't call their relationship abusive, it is still an oppressive situation, because she does not own her life or her choices. She's simply making the best of what she's been forced to work with. And I agree with you. She's brilliant at that.
Yeah.
And if we can call that reinvention, even in jail, her relationship with Hester, I found so comforting. Like, oh, good, she's going to find something of value even here.
Which, by the way, can we just pause for a minute and talk about the fact that the character from the Scarlet Letter was in this book, which is extra amusing when you know that one of the judges, Judge Hathorne, his grandson was the person who wrote the Scarlet Letter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I found that just to be a great, it's an Easter egg, right? It's a fun Easter egg. And Hawthorne, it's the same time period, isn't it? The Scarlet Letter.
I think before Salem. Yeah, I
Before?
think it's like the 1670s or 80s.
Okay,
If I
but
remember correctly.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
generally, yes.
So Hawthorne was alive at the time and probably living near the jail. I don't know.
Well, no, Hawthorne wasn't his. I believe it was his grandfather who was Judge
Or the-
Hathorne, and then Nathaniel Hawthorne added a W to his name because he was so ashamed of
I
his
see.
family's involvement in the Salem witch trials.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And Linda and I were both at the House of Seven Gables recently together, so I'll just bring her into the conversation for a hot second.
Yeah, that was great. And I loved Hester's character. And I mean, what she brought to Tituba, I think was so valuable.
She was such a modern character that she
Yeah.
felt, I mean, she really did feel out of time, which was also really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, as you guys mentioned that with Hester, it was really cool, at least that most of the women, even though they were being persecuted, really connected with each other. They didn't try to, bring each other down.
Mhm.
Even it's like I won't name women that are innocent. As much as I may dislike them, I won't do that.
Mhm.
It was nice that happened in this book because that definitely didn't happen in the Salem
Yeah.
witch trial.
Yeah.
So what did we think about, I'm moving on to the next question, Condé's portrayal of spirituality, mysticism, magic? Any thoughts on that with Tituba or otherwise?
I mean, I appreciated that she brought, some of the like Caribbean magic into it, but it was too distracting for me from a historical standpoint to appreciate it as much as I would have liked.
I think what was distracting for me was the animal sacrifices. I just couldn't get a handle of that. I think, and this is kind of, and I'm, still working on my own spirituality, but it's a sense of having power over things you can't control and being connected to nature and her culture is kind of how I saw it. Like that was her possibly only freedom in expressing herself in ways that was looked down upon by others.
Mm. I like that idea of her expressing her freedom through it. And I think it connects to what I was thinking about. I loved the way she found flexibility. When they arrive in Boston and she's like, what the hell grows here? How am I going to make my teas or and she starts to learn about the local vegetation and figures out what plants do what. And I thought, oh, isn't that beautiful? That her way is to adapt. Her way is to make magic from what is, rather than insisting on what must be, which I find so Christian and puritanical, right? That the right thing is one right way and anything else is, bad, not acceptable. She's got this adaptability that is it's tied to nature in any form. And I really appreciated that in the book. I remember reading in the afterword though that Condé did absolutely no research and knows nothing about magic. She talks about how when people heard she was writing this book, she suddenly got all these solicitations for interviews about Caribbean magic. And she was like, "What? I don't know anything. What do you mean you want to talk to me? I'm not, oh, but you're writing about Tituba." No, but I she just invented things. So none of it it's not African inspired. It's not Caribbean inspired. It's not taken from any life experience even. She just, obviously she used vegetables common to the Caribbean, roots and things like that. But there's no real practice being represented, which I think is also great. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think it's also great because if we don't know what it is, then to do research and conjecture on what it might have been to get it right is kind of a waste of time anyway. You're not going to get it right. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I feel like I already answered that question.
Yes.
Well, then it would make sense what Debbie said, that this is not Caribbean magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Something that Lisette said made me think of something that I hadn't quite thought about, but having Tituba as a practitioner of magic gives her power in a world that she doesn't have power. And as I had that thought that you inspired, Lisette, I was just thinking about the Salem witch trials generally and how these girls who were at the bottom, other than enslaved people, you know, had no power until they started accusing people, and suddenly everyone went to them to find out who the witches were. And so it's an interesting parallel that I hadn't thought about. I don't know if Condé intended that parallel or not, but I mean, really, the book is all about, you know, who has power, who doesn't have power, what you do to get power, what you do to keep power, how you lose it. And so in that way, it kind of ties her story with that of the girls and the other accusers.
Yeah, definitely.
And her personal power in particular seems so tied to her mother, to her mentor. I forget which one is which. Yaya and Ben, the way they constantly appear and guide her and talk to her, and she's open to that, to those messages. Her ability to connect to the dead, to help Benjamin speak to his wife and daughter. I found myself reflecting on that. I don't have an assessment of it or a well-formed comment. Just wow, it's interesting that that's one of her talents, right? To connect with those who came before, to maintain communication beyond life and death. Is the lines are blurred for her. I think it gives her a bravery in each individual situation that she's in.
There was another book, was it A Secret History of Witches, where we were talking about like the power of your ancestors and being able to like draw on them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a comment. That was it. I just tried to.
Yeah, but no, I remember us talking about how there's a power in sort of recognizing that your story is much longer than just the part that you get to live out. And there's a comfort in that. Your story will continue in some way as a reflection of your actions or your time here. Let's talk a little bit about Paris. This next question is a doozy. I read this one to my son and he was like, "Oh, that's good, mommy." Discuss the examples of irony presented in the juxtaposition of Satan and Paris, as well as Tituba's perception of what Satan looks like. Why does she have this view? Why does Paris fit this description?
I mean, Paris kind of is the devil.
Yeah, I mean, personified.
Yeah.
I think a beautiful example was the way his wife described sex, to someone like Tituba, who Tituba enjoys her sexual relationship with her husband, right? And has some say in how it happens. And, Goody Paris talks about him not even taking off his clothes and, just being really used as an object in a very dehumanizing way.
I think also she describes whenever she describes them coming into the room, if
Mhm.
I almost got a sense like there's like a cold draft.
Ooh, yeah.
It's just kind of all in black and I don't know, just no passion, no everything that's opposite of life, right? Even death for Tituba is there's joy there and there's connection, but he doesn't embody any of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of like the worst of Puritanism. He like takes it to an extreme that like mutilates it into something evil.
Hmm.
That's a good point, yeah.
Right, because he perpetuates the very evil he claims to be fighting. I don't know, like,
Yeah.
yeah, personifying Satan while you claim to be, cleansing the world of the devil or protecting it from the devil, whatever that is. I found it entertaining, truly, the way the girls played the game in the household of confessing, like little, sins that they knew would satisfy him. And the way their behavior would change and the things that they would do in secret and play and, learn about with Tituba, and then present a whole different picture in his presence. I thought it was a beautiful depiction of how hypocrisy is taught and encouraged, really. In any culture where a set of expectations is so absolutely maintained that there is no room for error. A child will learn to appear perfect while doing a whole different set of, right? So these girls are becoming the picture of hypocrisy that's being exemplified for them.
Did it say in the book, I can't remember now, what Abigail Williams' past was, like where she came from before they were in Salem?
I think it is mentioned at some point that her parents were killed violently, that she was orphaned and killed, they were killed. I think it's mentioned.
Yeah, I just, because I mean, I know that her parents were killed by Native Americans, and obviously, at this time, even Massachusetts was kind of the Wild West in terms of, how we picture it today, with, Native American and white relations. So I think I know we're supposed to be talking about Paris, but it's interesting how Abigail is such a troublemaker in this book.
Mm.
And, we talked about Tituba's trauma earlier. Like Abigail Williams has trauma, and the way she deals with it is ridiculous, but like she somehow still manages to do it within the confines of her society, but it comes out in those secret moments. It's like she knows how to play the game, and it's the only way she can deal with all the violence that was right in front of her eyes as she was growing up, and forced her to be in this household with this man who at the very best was a greedy asshole, at the worst is the way he's depicted in this book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. Yeah. She did have a traumatic past as well. And afraid of the unknown, right? Because they were scared of Tituba for the things she knew and how she looked. And they always made those comments about her being different, even with the stories that she would tell them. They'd always ask, is it evil? Is it okay? She would
Mm-hmm.
explain, no, this is okay. This is how it was, or is how it is.
And the time period, I mean, there's such a lack of understanding of so many things. So it's really a very superstitious society, right? They didn't understand illness. So the plague, or, any kind of plague or illness that spread, was an act of the devil. And they didn't understand the cultures that they encountered here on the continent. So they were savages. They were, Native Americans were seen, I think, as violent representations of, heathen, I don't know, from a Christian perspective, right? A heathen population. And all of that unknown is, you're just being surrounded by danger, even in nature as well. They came to a land that they didn't know how to farm it, how to, and so generations have experienced at this point, couple generations, famine and disease, to a point where they believe they are being punished for their evils by everything, by all of it, by war, by plague.
Not to mention that it was a mini ice age.
Right.
Just to add that to the list.
So Paris looks like such a hero in that context. And I associate that maybe this is my Christian upbringing here, but the idea that Satan will disguise himself, right, as a picture of goodness, and will appear in a way that tempts you, because it, and Paris is representing here order and authority and power and knowledge. And so there is, even though we see the evil in the context historically, he's a source of comfort, I dare say, in that regard. And that's so confusing. That's so confusing when your only source of comfort and security is also the man who regularly abuses you mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all the E's, right? What a confusing society to be born into and be forced to grow up in. Do we have examples of that now? I feel like we must. We do, of course. Maybe not in that way, but
I think we do. I mean, off the top of my head, maybe not as black and white as this character in the book, but think about Bill Cosby. I mean, he was a great actor. He was an activist. He did a lot of things to promote Black actors, but he was also an abuser. And some of these women, they admired him, and also
America's dad.
America's dad, yeah. Kobe Bryant, or what's the director, Harry Weinstein?
oh, Weinstein, yeah.
Harvey, the producer.
I always say his name wrong. I don't know why. But
You don't want he who shall not be named. Yeah.
A lot of folks that are good probably help a lot of people in their careers, and they had those both things hand to hand. But yeah, I think that's still, I mean, the Catholic Church, right? They just had a huge lawsuit against them.
Yeah, all great examples. And religiously, it happens all the time. I mean, we hear about cult after cult after cult, where one religious leader is like marrying off all the girls or marrying them to himself, or whatever. There's countless representations of that, certainly. But I love that you're bringing up non-religious ones, because or maybe it is religious. We do have a worship of celebrity in our culture. We do have a worship of, right?
Yeah.
And people will do anything to sort of get close to it or benefit from that power that it carries.
Well, even the Boy Scouts had a big lawsuit against them. So it's like relationships, right? Where people need you and you're in control or have that power dynamic. I think that could easily be turned.
I was thinking, just to add to everything you've already said, I think it must be a very confusing time for boys right now. What is toxic masculinity? When is it toxic? When is it not? When is it just bad behavior? Is it okay for boys to cry? I mean, of course it is, but is it? You know what I mean? Like, I think right now, I mean, not to give boys any credit for things that they shouldn't, they should just be good people, right? And a story. But I feel bad. Like there's so many mixed messages that are like specifically aimed at boys right now. Like, what does it mean to be a man? And And if you are a man, does that mean that you're now toxic? Like it's,
Mhm.
It is. I mean, I have a 19-year-old son, so I can definitely relate to that. And having, he said to me recently, Mom, why is it that the guys can only talk about anger? We have a lot of other emotions too, you know.
Good for him.
good.
Yeah, but it's really hard. I mean, that's the price of patriarchy. It affects us
Right.
all.
Right. Right. I've had quite a few conversations. I have a almost 16-year-old son, who presents very much as a white man. But I'm Hispanic. So and on the inside, he feels like different than what he presents as, right? And we talk a lot about how people will perceive him in the world and what people will assume about him based on how he looks. And they may assume to know how he feels about the world based, right? And what his job is to in how he presents, or what responsibility he carries in that, it's a constant topic. So it's not just about the masculine topics, but racial ones and cultural ones as well. And being sensitive to each other as a whole, like Debbie, I'm hearing what you're saying, thinking, yeah, like we've turned the tables and we've made men the evil players in our story. But as Lisette said, they are also victims of that whole structure. And if they don't heal, we don't heal.
There's a cool his name is his poet name is Guante, Guante. I don't know if you guys have seen his stuff. He has this really cool like poetry. Button poetry is I think his like whatever name thing or what, but he's got the 10 responses to the phrase man up.
Ooh.
It's really cool. And so hearing people like him and Rudy Francisco is another one. The Heart and the Fist is one of his poems. Is really exciting that men are talking about toxic masculinity, and that brings me hope. I gotta have hope when I have a little guy. Well, he's not a little guy anymore. But I still remember this little boy I had. And I remember when I was pregnant. Just random, and I'll be quick. But I was upset. I was a girl, and I told my friend I was gonna raise a feminist, and I'm having a boy. And she looks at me and is like, "You can still raise a feminist."
Yes.
That's right. And then I started reading everything that had to do with boys and toxicity and all. So it starts early on, junior high. These little guys are already. You don't talk, you don't cry, you fight. And they gotta survive. They have to adapt, like Tituba. They have to survive and adapt to make
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Decided to pop in after all because I've been
Yay,
listening.
Linda.
I've been listening all along, and y'all have been really fascinating. Yeah, you could start a podcast. But it seemed to me, just sitting here being kind of a passive, active listener, though, that all the issues, and I really mean all the issues that are raised in this book, are replaying today. Everything. It's insane. It's craziness.
I
But
felt that.
I have a nice time at the house at Seven Gables with Debbie. So, but yeah, it's really sad.
Oh, we lost you. Can't hear you, Linda. We didn't hear after. You're muted.
Okay, there we go. I have a hard time when I do this on my phone because I'm so used to doing it on computer. Anyway, what'd I say? Where did you lose me?
It's really sad.
It's really sad to watch history repeat itself in some pretty similar variation. It's not like this is like wildly, radically different stuff. It's kind of like I'm watching a merry-go-round. It's disappointing. But I did have a great time in Salem with Debbie, and I think we should have a society convention there.
Agreed.
Great idea. That is a great idea.
First field trip.
Yeah. Our second one can be New Orleans, but our first one should be Salem.
Yeah.
New Orleans would be good too.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to that next one. Is it Voodoo Dreams? Is that the next
Oh,
book?
the Voodoo Queen one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I just
For
made
next
it
month?
dreams.
Yeah. So back to the book, if we can, there's a couple of, I'm not going to go through every single question, but there was one in particular too, maybe that I definitely want to touch on. And one is, you alluded to it earlier, Lisette. There are some, even though Tituba suffers a great deal, there are some beautifully loving relationships in this book. Can we find a way to highlight those? Maybe pick one that struck a chord with you.
For me, I think it would be the Hester one,
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't just friendship, but it definitely felt like more, and it made Tituba almost feel like non-binary or bi, or whatever the right terminology is at this point in time. But it was unexpected, and considering everything that was going on in that moment, having Hester there for her to lean on, it felt more pure than any of the other loving relationships she had in the book.
That was a nice one. You know, I think there were several, I forget the name of the characters, but when she got to the new homes in Boston, the other woman that, hey, Tituba, I know who you are. Let me help you find the plants that are here that you can substitute. Or even when she was on the ship, the last man who was taking her to Barbados.
Yes.
Like there were people like, we're the same, and we have, you know, and then those connections were natural to her. And even with her Jewish lover that she kept talking about, she thought of that relationship fondly, and with the kids, their children and his daughter. There were a lot of really wonderful relationships that she had that probably kept her wanting to keep living and loving.
I loved from the very beginning. Again, I lost track of who's who, but after she loses her mother, who was really never able to fully nurture her, she has this mentor. So it's
Yeah.
right. And that idea that you could find guidance and comfort and motherly love in someone who is not your own. I loved that. And I love that she got that from somebody. And I think maybe it's one of the reasons she was able to mother other people who were not her own children later on. You mentioned Benjamin's daughter, Lisette. I loved how it was explained that the daughter had to be the one to prepare the food, because Tituba, I guess, according to Jewish law, couldn't prepare certain things or wasn't allowed to. And so it seemed like they shared household responsibilities in a sisterly fashion. And I found that very comforting from Tituba's perspective. Not so much like she was left out, right? Which surprised me. I was like, oh, that's it, you know. I'm thinking if I was Tituba, I'd be like, fine, great, she can cook. That's good. I don't know, like it was a way that she could be served rather than only being the one serving.
Yeah.
Any other positives. I was looking for positives, loving relationships in her life. Okay. I think a lot of the other questions we've actually already touched on. I said I was going to mention two, but we've talked about everything. How do you feel about hypocrisy? We talked about mother-daughter. Yeah. We just go in. We just do it.
Nailed it.
Yeah. So next month's fiction book is exciting. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about it except the title. But it should be good. I want to mention that I have more book suggestions for 2023 than I can fit into the year. And I want to have a little meeting with Sheila about it. I'm going to stop the recording here at this point, but